evening and welcome to Inside the Rookery Season 8, Episode 5. I'm glad you continued your raving, Andy Law, because I could see it down the bottom of the screen while the countdown was playing.
There was a giggle mid-countdown.
There was.
Was that me?
Yeah, it was you.
Did I forget to leave myself on mute and laugh? Ooh, that's embarrassing. It's really lucky Andy's married to me because no one else would laugh at his dad jokes. True fact.
Fair comment.
Fair.
I can't believe there is a giggle mid-countdown. So hey to all the Lawhammer guys who've raided us, whoop whoop, and hello to Andy and to Mark who have joined me this week to talk about sequels and supplements. Is bigger always better? We explore the facts.
Ooh.
We've got, as always, lots of questions that have been pre-submitted on our Discord server by our patrons. Thanks always to them. And we will, of course, take questions and comments from the chat. So if there's anything you'd like to ask Andy and Mark, please do jump in right now.
Yeah,
apparently, Alistair was checking the other tab for where the chuckle came from. No, it's just me. I didn't know it could do that. I actually thought that the sound, the countdown, overrode us, even if we took ourselves off mute. So I have learned something new today.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm particularly looking forward to this one because it's something that we've between us all discussed multiple times in the past, and we've also been in other jobs responsible for handling, whether it's new additions or creating entirely new supplements or something else. So yeah, this is going to be, I think, quite a fun one. I'm also hearing a slight echo in my voice, so I think your mic's picking me up, Lindsay.
Oh, okay.
Possibly.
Let me just check.
It's only a slight one though. It's very, very little. I don't know if anyone else is catching that.
Is that better?
Yes. In fact, it's much better. Perfect.
Good. Then it was me and it's fixed. I am a technical wizard.
You're doing well this evening.
It's not the same thing.
Yeah. So here's a question: sequels or prequels, which are better?
I have an opinion on this, which is purely me-based, literally nothing else, and it's my preference. I freaking hate prequels most of the time. Having said that, that doesn't mean that a prequel can't come along. I watch it and I go, actually, that's good. Or a game comes along, I play it and I go, oh, that is good. But generally speaking, I prefer plots moving forwards rather than going backwards and often retrofitting plot to try and make sense of what comes later.
Just to be clear, I wrote this subtitle and I meant Star Wars. So I mean, I'm just gonna tell you now.
I was trying to apply it to board games, and I was thinking, now, is the old world now a prequel?
The old world is a prequel.
Well, we do actually have a question that someone submitted on that, Mark. So I'll bring that up. We'll bring that up first, seeing as you mentioned it. So Lazy Cat asks, do you think Warhammer Old World should have been a different game, or would it have been better as a supplement? Feels like writing new rules is a waste of resources. Okay,
so there's two answers to this because there's two games. Game number one is the battle game. And when it comes to the battle game, Warhammer Old World is just a new game because Warhammer Fantasy Battle 8th edition was the last edition of that game and it came to an end. And then Old World has come along and started an entirely new game line sent some 220, 30, 40 years back into the past and starting there just before the Great Chaos Incursion where Magnus the Pious holds off the Chaos Hordes from the north.
So to answer Mark's question, in the lore, therefore it's a prequel.
Correct. Okay, 100% a prequel, and they're rewriting the Warhammer world as they do it. I've been interested to see all the changes they're making to the, let's say, the background as they slowly but surely work out the new version of what the old world is, because they're basically stomping about going, that thing that used to be a thing no longer is, but generally for the better, particularly if you take a look at Graham McNeil's new book, which was pretty awesome as he dealt with the Bretonians and quite clearly showed that the misogyny of the past for Bretonia is in the freaking past where it belongs. We have moved on into a different version of the Warhammer world. But there's also a second answer to this one. Fantasy roleplay. And in fantasy roleplay, it's going to be an entirely new game. So the question here is, would they be better making the old world as a supplement for the existing, say, 4th edition of Warhammer, so you can play the old world by playing this, or do you make an entirely new game with an entirely new rule set, which is also a prequel? And I am against the idea of a new game, but not against the idea of a new rule book. Because a new rulebook can come along and add all the background that's required for that, change all the necessary components to make it match what the world is like some 200 odd years beforehand, and refine the rules. But do I think an entirely new rule set is worthwhile? No, because you really want to be able to use all of the existing material that is out there with the other game with your new game. Yeah. And if you can't do that, it feels like a massive waste of opportunity, because in particular for the studio that's behind this, they don't have a very large publishing schedule. That being the case, you want to allow as many people as possible to use the existing material that's out there. And if you create a new game that is entirely secluded by itself, they have nothing else that they can then buy into. But if they buy this new old world version and all the books that you've got for the other edition can also be used, suddenly you've got a ton of extra rules you've got access to with other books, and you will sell more of your other books. So for me, I'm kind of the opinion that you would the most compatibility, the better.
I mean, Oxecutor says, and this is a fair point, it may be that GW considers Old World a separate license to work for it, so they have to write a new rule set.
In fact, I don't think there's any maybe about that. It almost certainly is a separate license. Almost certainly, but that doesn't mean that the rules don't need to be compatible. Take a look at the various 40k games that came out from FFG. FFG released a whole slew of role-playing games for 40k, all of which use the same core set of rules, allowing you to mix and match and play around with things. There was lots of little asides and things were handled differently in each one, but the core of it all was the same, and each one came with its own core book. So you had one for your Space Marines, your Death Watch or whatever, you had one for your Inquisitors Warband, you had one for various other stuff too, Rogue Traders for example, and each one of those could be slotted together to create some gigantic horror show of a 40k game if you wish to do so. And I think that was making potentially better use of the setting than a new rule set entirely would make. So broadly, I'm of the opinion it should be the same.
So who's doing the old world RPG then? It's not Cubicle 7.
It is.
Oh, it is?
Yeah. They've got the license and they announced that about a year ago, I'm going to guess. But they've not released anything for it yet.
Shadition says, absolutely, we're really hoping the new Old World game will end up compatible. Shadition, have you changed your avatar? Because I don't remember it being a cool giant top hat and moustache. So tell me in the comments. I need to know. I must know the answer. Oxecutor hopes it's rule set 4.5. Yeah. And Wolfsbane says, I like Call of Cthulhu having just one system for multiple period settings. Call
of Cthulhu is the model that should be followed. And indeed, I discussed this at the time, and particularly because Mike, who we've had on the show obviously in the past, go check out our stream with Mike Mason. Mike, who runs Call of Cthulhu, is, I think, provided, I think, a perfect example for how you can use that same setting, that same rule setting, for all of their worlds. And it's perfect. I think it's the right way to do it. Now, it doesn't mean the system's perfect, but it does mean that how they're handling it is potentially perfect.
And Martin says Andor was a pretty great Star Wars sequel.
Andor was great, and it was a prequel. And was great. I agree. My personal preference for not liking prequels can be completely thrown out the window when the new piece of material is brilliant. And I think Andor was brilliant. Really enjoyed that.
Yeah, I think it's the exception to the rule, though. You know, in many instances, oftentimes the prequels and sequels feel like a bit of a ill-conceived cash grab. You know, so it's rare that one comes along and you go, "Oh no, actually that's really good. Actually, that's better than the original." You know. Yeah. I think of Terminator and Terminator 2. Well, Alien and Aliens, very different films, both equally awesome.
Yeah, we were discussing this just the other day down at this end, and I agree completely. Alien is fascinating because of this, because Terminator and Alien took very different routes towards how to organize a sequel. Terminator 2 was more Terminator, where Aliens 2 was a completely different genre, a different movie. It was an action movie where the previous one had been a horror movie. And the differences between them were significant. And I think that in both cases were very good examples of how sequels can be done. One example was you take everything that made the original great and you try to do the same thing again but better, and you do your best to do that, and you run in a similar line, developing everything a little bit further, where Aliens was taking everything that made the original great and going, how could I live in the same universe and tell a different but equally great story? And whilst the story arguably for Aliens is much weaker, the overall, I mean, arguably, it's really arguable, the overall movie was nonetheless brilliant. And whilst I much prefer Alien to Aliens, and
I can't decide. I can't pick. I can't split for very different reasons. But I love both of them equally. I've tried.
I think I prefer Alien purely because the symbology and the undercurrent and the greater depth is there, where there isn't one for Aliens. Aliens just a cool fucking romp, and I really, really enjoy it. Where the first one is also speaking a lot about motherhood, about sexual assault, about other topics, but it's also just a horror movie, and it's a really, really good one. And the more I learn about Alien and the ideas that went behind it, the more I go, holy shit, that movie was good. But the more I learn about Aliens, the more I go, yeah, they really nailed that execution. Rather than thinking, oh, there was an awful lot more going beneath it all. Right down to just Mother being the computer. It's just great. It's just really, really good. But that's a personal preference, purely. It's in no way is that objective.
I feel like in titling this section, I've invented a new franchise. Gonna put that out there.
I mean, there's comic books of that, right? Terminator versus Alien. It's only a matter of time. It's only a matter of time.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah, of course.
You've got Judge Dredd versus Alien. You know, it's all out there.
Wolf Spain says the officers versus crew dynamic in Alien was also great. Now, the interesting thing about Alien is it's not at all. The only interesting thing about Alien is when I, Lindsay Law, watched it. Just so you know. So I watched Aliens first because I was a teenager and I had a boyfriend and he was and it must have just come out or something, and he was like, oh, this is a really cool film, you should watch it. And I hadn't watched Alien because I was maybe a bit younger, and it wasn't the kind of thing my parents would have let me watch. I just wouldn't have seen it. So I didn't see Alien for years and years and years after I saw Alien. So to me, they're not even I just think of them as completely separate films. I never came to them with a bag like Aliens. I didn't even know there was an Alien when I watched Aliens. I was just, this is a film called Aliens. It's really cool. I like it.
So for me, I was not that parent. I introduced my kids to all of the Alien movies in turn. We had commentary and everything. It was great when they were suitably young to be properly terrified, as is only right and proper for all parents.
I think as I said before, my mum smuggled me into the cinema to see Aliens.
Wow.
I love that.
I do think this is an interesting point. The officers versus crew dynamic in Alien was also great. In Alien, I felt like it really felt like a real place and a real ship and just like a real future that could happen. And sometimes I hate it when I am unimmersed from sci-fi, because I'm like, I just don't believe it. I don't believe it would be like that. I don't believe people would be like that. I don't believe everything would look like that. I don't believe they dress like that. And I don't believe they talk like that. And in Alien, they didn't do any of that stuff that annoys me.
Good old alien space truckers.
So
Yeah.
Dark Deeds 2 or prequel coming. Well, so Dark Deeds is a second edition.
I have gathered all the supplementary material we made for the first game. So
nice.
We did it the first time out, and most of that stuff that's Darker Deeds.
Nice.
The first time around, most of that stuff actually, all the bits that really worked, all the bits that we really liked, all the bits that weren't just one-shot gimmicky things, which you put into things like booster packs for conventions and stuff.
Yeah.
All that went into the new edition. So all the good stuff we've already rolled into the new edition of Dark Deeds. Yeah. But we have talked about things that we could have included in it. And we think, well, maybe we'll do a sequel, or maybe we'll do an expansion, depending on how we feel about it, how well the new edition sells. To be honest, because if there's no demand for more of the same, then
That being the case, I have indeed just posted the links to go buy your own copy of Dark Deeds right now, because if you'd like to see Darker Deeds or Dark Deeds 2, The Darkening, the only way to receive these things is for this game to sell a bajillion copies. So please be part of the bajillion. Join us for our Darker Deeds moment, because we would like to make more, not just for Dark Deeds itself, but as a potential sequel, of which we've got a couple of things sitting, percolating away. But we'll be very much going down probably the Aliens route rather than the Terminator 2 route, and going down a different route.
We made a thing as a promo when Dark Deities, which is what Andy's hinting at there, was very much in production. We made a little promo thing called Loot of the Gods, which is a very cool little CD pack thing with a bunch of loot cards that connect to the gods that we're going to be in Dark Deities.
Nice.
And then Dark Deities ended up going to a development hell where it still languishes. But who knows? Who knows?
Indeed. Drunken Mystic Ironlung says, hello, hope all is well. I can't wait to play Dark Deeds with my brother's family. We would love to hear about it when you do. Give us your glowing reviews. Thanks. That's what we want.
The glowing reviews. That would be lovely.
Well, I went through all these this morning just as to remind myself what was in these, and it's kind of interesting. I've forgotten about a whole bunch of it, and there was little fun little gimmicky things like the Gen Con set. We did a special card which was a D&D adventurer party, but it didn't have a sort of defense rating on it. But what came with the box was a D20, a classic D&D D20, and every time you encountered the party on the street, you would roll the D20 to determine its strength. So again, stuff that's fun for a little booster pack, but stuff you wouldn't want to put in the core game because it's
yep.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of Carcassonne in that way. Like, we every now and then, when the kids were small, they would ask us to play Carcassonne, and they do the same with that other game that I don't play, Talisman, and they were just like, put everything in. Carcassonne with every expansion is just insane. Like, it goes on forever, but it's great. There's certain expansions we've talked about on these streams in Carcassonne, like the Princess and the Dragon, which adds randomity that's good when you're playing with mixed ability groups, like if you're playing with kids. And so that's why they loved it, because they thought it was hilarious that the dragon would go around eating people. But like, I like to mix and match the supplements that I would use rather than just like dumping them all in.
Yeah, Carcassonne is pretty much famous for that.
Yeah, I tend if I'm backing a game on Kickstarter and it says, "Oh, do you want to get these expansion add-ons?" I'm usually like kind of knowing the process. It's usually stuff that ends up in the expansion is stuff that's been cut from the game because it just adds blow or slow stuff down or all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Usually, so I go, "No, I'll just get the core game, thanks." And if people tell me that expansion's awesome, it makes the game that much better, then I'll go out and get it possibly afterwards. But I tend to go, the core game is the one that's usually been refined and tweaked and tightened up, and that's probably the best example of the game. Usually. Yeah, so
you're supporting that. Martin's comment there. I still prefer Catan without any expansions. Me too, because exactly what Mark was describing there is something that Catan's extra expansions tend to do, which is that they tend to bloat it out, make it a longer game, make it more complicated, and not necessarily better. Whereas a bunch of other games, let's pick up, say, Seven Wonders. The first couple of expansions for Seven Wonders integrated seamlessly with the actual core gameplay, and they didn't necessarily slow anything down at all. And the game itself kept its very quick, often not more than half an hour to 45 minutes, even when you had 7 players playing it. It was particularly well designed. So it does depend on the game.
To the first, like the leaders expansions and stuff, that added to the variety of the games, because my criticism of Seven Wonders was, I've made this again before on the streams, that it's just a bit meh. Like, you're not, like, you don't really get excited about building the lighthouse, and so every game starts to feel really samey. But if you've got those leaders and you've got things that cause slightly different things, then it does really like break it up and make it more fun. And I say that as Seven Wonders being one of my favorite games. I do love to play it.
Good point. The second edition Talisman from the 80s, when you had all the expansions, it broke the box completely. It was, and it took really long time to play. But interestingly, I'm going to argue that the second edition of Talisman was much better balanced than the current edition of Talisman, which is basically the re-edition from FFG, which was just more upon more upon more being added. It was a better balance. The most balanced, and again, somewhat controversially, is probably the third edition, which was the one that Games Workshop produced in-house and had an awful lot more Warhammer connections to it. So they included things like Jade Wizards and the like. And that version was just the core board plus its 2 corner board expansions and then the Dragon expansion for the center. And it felt like a game that was always designed to have those expansions added, where the other editions where we made a game and then we added a bit. And then we added a bit. With the third edition, very much felt like, okay, this is all the expansions that I had before. What can we take from those to make a really good game? They built the game and then released the first part of it and then the other parts of it. And just felt in general like a more cohesive game. But it was also one of the blandest editions, which is, I find, quite interesting in terms of its selling. The thing that, the small anecdote on that one that always amused me was that it didn't sell anywhere near as well as was hoped with its expansions. So all of the expansions got dropped out to the Works, which is a UK stock shop where you can buy the overstocks for books and similar. And all of the expansions for Talisman were dropping out in the local stores for like a £5 each. And which was super cheap because it also came with Games Workshop models. One of them, the Dragon, came with a gigantic fucking plastic Games Workshop Dragon, which you would put right in the very center. So the Works was getting obviously quite a lot of those sold in a very short order in a way that Games Workshop themselves couldn't sell, which I thought was kind of fascinating just to see it happen in practice. But in turn, those very same expansions now that I know one person who bought literally 20 of each of them because a miniature addict, are now selling often on average for around about 200 to 250 each.
Wow.
So yeah, that says something, doesn't it? Yeah. So, when sequels both go wrong and then for the consumer go very right. Yeah.
Yeah, Talisman is all about being a huge
Expansions.
game. Yeah.
Good times.
So what's your favourite sequel to any property? Asks Lazy Cat.
Any. Well, that's hard.
Yeah.
Any. Oh, there's so many. I mean, books, games, TV, movie. Oh. And we've already discussed Alien. Okay, I'm finding this one really hard to pin down, so perhaps a little bit of direction. So choose, for example.
I'm going to jump in, and it's an expansion rather than a sequel, and it's favorite because it was a very happy, creative, positive time in my career, and that's when I got to work on the Wrath of the Lich King expansion for World of Warcraft.
Nice.
So that was it became my favorite because it was awesome. Get sort of drafted in with in the sort of 6 months prior to release and said, can you design us a load of monsters and stuff for our Frozen North? I'm like, yeah, sure. I mean, we go. And then the team liked what I did so much, they invited me to join the team full time, and I did that just in time for all the launch parties that celebrated the release of it. So like, way.
Good times. Okay, so choosing work-based related one. The one that really got me going most at the beginning was probably the Tome of Salvation for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. That was a book that, I mean, it was far from my first gig when it came to role-playing, either doing art or maps or whatever, and I did art, maps, and writing for that book. But what that book was for me was the first time I moved from writing, large chunks about something or another to being part of a team, which was fun because I'd never really done the team writing thing before. And then through the process of that, having the initial writing commission was 40k words from each of us. So that would have been 160k for the book. I ended up on 75k and everyone ended up on differing amounts below that, largely because of how it unfolded as we did our plans and it all came out, and it was just such a creative process. Come the end of it, I then moved into a different team when it came to the art. So I got to be part of the art team. Then it came to the cartography. I got to be part of the cartography team. And that was exactly the same point when the editing went down. So I got the entire book sent back to me in its completed form and got to do entire editing parts as part of the editing team too. So I was involved with every single step of the process in a way that I had never been on any other book. In any other book, I'd be involved with writing, or I'd been asked to do a map for something, or Andy, can you do a quick portrait of this thing? Like, sure, there you go, there's a thing. Give us my dollars, thanks very much. This one, I felt like I was involved with every single step of the process. And come the end of it, I was so invested with that book, it was silly in a way that I hadn't been in any previous ones. And to the point that there's still parts of it that to this day bug me in a way that is sitting at the back of my head and will never go away. Should never have been like that. That sort of thing. And it also led then directly on to what happened with the Tome of Corruption, which was a book about chaos that was written by Rob Schwab, where I came in and did an editing pass, a development pass. I did an art pass for that one as well, and did a bunch of maps for that too. And it led to that directly. And who doesn't like playing with frickin' chaos? I mean, it's just too much fun. So yeah, for me, that was probably my favorite when we're looking at career-wise, purely because it established my awareness of a far bigger picture in a way that no other project I'd been involved with up to that point did. And it changed the direction of my career as I then started moving more towards doing producing and working towards building books rather than necessarily writing them or illustrating them or mapping them or whatever. So yeah, it's what eventually landed me, I suppose, the 4th edition job, because I'd done it several times in multiple books beforehand.
Balash, sorry if I've pronounced that wrong. We don't have a ZS in English too often. As someone working on an IP, how do you stop sequels? Just the Leprechaun movies coming to my mind. Did the world really need 8 of them? I don't think I've seen a single one of them.
I have. I think I've probably seen about maybe 6 or 7 of them. I watch a lot of shitty movies.
Are they like horror movies? Like the Leprechauns are really bad?
It's Warwick Davis as well. Playing the Leprechaun, overacting and hamming up like mad. Good times. You don't, unless you own the IP.
Yeah, you have to own the IP to say no, you can't do anything with it.
Yep, that's pretty much it. If you don't own the IP, which particularly when it comes to movies, you very, very, very rarely do. You just literally don't.
No studio is going to buy the rights to your book or your comic or your game without securing the IP, transferring the you always be the creator, but what a studio chooses to do with it, if they choose to make more movies, that's almost always going to be signed into the option.
Okay,
yeah,
right,
so, yeah. You're powerless to stop it unless you make it yourself.
Yep.
I mean, who owns the Alien IP? 20th
It's Disney.
Disney now, isn't it? It's Disney.
Yep,
yeah.
It's Disney. Which is kind of crazy.
Does that mean the Alien Queen is now a Disney princess?
Yeah, totally is. When they first took it, there was quite a lot of fan memes popping up with Leia and I think it was Snow White and the alien. I'm going, hey, look at what Disney's become. Disney princesses. Should have done the alien in a dress. It would have been great.
Disney own the world.
Yeah, they do.
Oh, here's a good point. Estisna. Scoundrels of Skullport for Lords of Waterdeep is another example of a great expansion. Can't imagine playing without it.
Agreed. Lords of Waterdeep is one of those rare great games that's attached to a license. Many licensed games, as in a game that's attached to an existing world, aren't necessarily that great, because what they've done is they've bought the license to play in that world and created a game for it, and that immediately has channeled the creative process in a particular direction. Rather than, for example, creating something they desperately wanted to build, and they create a really cool game that inspires them, and that perhaps becomes something unique and interesting in and of itself. It's been created to spec. And often those games that are created to spec are created because someone wants to make money. That's it. And because they simply want to make money, I want a game in the D&D world, it's often rubbish. That is an example of a game that 100% is not. It is a great game. Not brilliantly balanced in some places, but very close to being brilliantly balanced, to the point that I have never played a game I haven't enjoyed.
Martin says, epic rap battles of history, Stan Lee versus Jim Henson really drives home the fact that Disney owns everything now. Lord of the Rings is a great sequel, says Golden Chaos, because it's a sequel to The Hobbit and to Tolkien's then unpublished Silmarillion. That's true, actually.
Yeah, good, yeah, excellent.
Good call. And not on my immediate first list of thoughts. Agreed completely.
Yeah.
No, I was thinking, well, is Two Towers, because that was the sequel.
Yeah, me too.
Fellowship of the Ring, but is the Two Towers is the classic middle of the story thing, so it's not a great. It's not. But no, you're quite right. No, the entire Lord of the Rings, for the Hobbit. Yeah.
And I don't think of the Two Towers and Return of the King as separate.
No, neither do I.
I just think of the Lord of the Rings.
Well, they broke it. Yeah, it was broken into 3 books because the cost of the paper post World War II, it was too expensive to make as a single book. So that's the only reason it's been done like that anyway. Yeah.
Oh, here's a Dark Deeds related comment. Still loading. Says, hello folks, thank you for my lovely new copy of Dark Deeds. My friends and some family have enjoyed it quite a bit. Excellent work.
That's awesome.
Now, I'm not saying that you can immediately join the joy that Still Loading has by going and buying your own copy, but you totally can. Go check the link sitting in the chat right now.
So Hawk Oddly asks, how do you find a good balance between referencing the work you're following versus letting it stand as its own thing?
Yeah, this one's a toughie. And is something that generally needs to be drilled down before you start, as to exactly what the purpose of the project that you're working on is. And it helps that you've established not just the tone, but the style of content that you intend to both riff off and reference. I'll give a direct example. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition wasn't the same game as 3rd by an enormous leap, nor 2nd nor 1st, but was most certainly the spiritual successor to 1st and 2nd. But how much should be drawn from those games, each 1, 2, and 3, was a core debate sitting behind the scenes at all times. And it was established in terms of tone from the outset, because I wanted humour to be a core component of writing Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay work again. I wanted the somewhat silly puns to be there, but not so silly that you spotted them but on the first read. It was always something that you would read it, and then later on someone would point something out and say, I've just seen a thing. And everyone goes, oh my God, that's a thing. So puns that were relatively clever or relatively obscure, references that were relatively clever and relatively obscure, with a couple of blatant things that were extremely obvious, that led almost like a handhold to there's other ones like this, go take a look. There's other things like this, go take a look. So some of them are really obvious, like for example Wilhelm Abgott being the Billy Idol equivalent, shouting out come the midnight hour, we'll all shout more for the Lord of Death. Pardon me, the God of Death more. That was a very obvious reference, but that was very much put there. Yeah, it made me laugh. You don't need to despair. Come the midnight hour, we cry more, because it's funny. So obvious references like that were there as a handhold. That one was written specifically to be obvious to anybody who had grown up in pretty much the 80s or referenced any band from the 80s at any point, and show that there was much more of that hidden and proliferated throughout the text, because that was fun. And 2nd edition, because it was written at its heart by Americans, and it was written by the Black Library in particular, who were following the 6th edition of Warhammer's goal of everything being much more let's call it po-faced, much more direct, much more grim, much more dark. The 6th edition of Warhammer had abandoned all of the 5th edition's tone, which was often quite cartoony. and had gone away from that completely, removed everything, gone black and white and grim, and dialed much more into the art of, say, the Kapinskis, where the Kapinskis are fucking gorgeous, but was universally a bit more realistic in tone.
The Kapinskis themselves are fucking gorgeous as well.
Oh, yeah.
Are they?
Good to know. That's a very important factoid for all you Warhammer fans out there. The Kapinskis, gorgeous. And the writing had followed suit, and the Americans who were writing it didn't do puns at all. I was told not to do that during second edition, and my writing was often bleak, and it was grimdark, and the bleak requires some sort of just something to give it release for the reader, if nothing else. So I was really hard on tone on that particular point. But I wasn't really hard on the writers for that, because some writers will get very afraid of that because it's hard to be funny. It's hard to be funny all the time, and it's hard to do puns like that. It was nothing more than a side comment of do try if you can, not important, and that removal of the pressure meant that there was quite a lot of experimental pushes, and then I could come in afterwards and say do this, do this, do this, do this, do this, to add in some extra flair, and we ended up with something that ended up winning best writing over at the Ennies, which was great. Very happy about that in particular, because often people don't look towards roleplay books for writing in particular. They're often thinking, well, do the rules work? Does this go? We've got a silver for that as well. But that was not the point. The point was we were looking to have something that would inspire people to read it, because the vast majority of Warhammer fans, contrary to what the general belief of the purchasing public is, don't play the games. They read them. And the same is the case for people who are reading the roleplay games. They were reading it. So we had to make sure that the core book was filled with interesting things to read, because it would make them more likely they'd also fucking buy the game and play it and continue playing with the expansions. Because far too many would just buy it because it was that lovely thing, and the aim was for them to read through it and go, oh, this is ace. Yeah. And hopefully buy the next one too, because it was a good read. So yeah, lots of people literally do not play games. They read them for a deeper insight into the Warhammer world, or something of an equivalent, and we wanted all of the Warhammer customers to buy it. So the writing tone from the beginning had to be nailed down, and it had to reference effectively our core buying market, which was not people who were young. The core buying market for fantasy roleplay was people my age at that point. Critical Role had not proliferated outside of where it was to the same degree when we were working on that point. The younger audience of D&D had not moved into the same degree, so we were very much trying to pull on the nostalgia of the first edition of the game, in particular with its tone. Because all of the people who loved the first edition would go, I'm in safe, familiar territory, and I love this. So, yeah. Pin it down at the beginning.
Any thoughts, Mark, and artistically? Is it easier or harder to?
I think you have to sort of stay true in terms of broad themes and style, but I think the opportunity to kind of push, as Andy said, with the humor and stuff. With me, if I think back to World of Warcraft again, because it is the tone is very light and whimsical, and for me, what I was trying to do was actually introduce some genuine darkness and put some edge in there with the concept art, which was, the inverse of what the game had been to that point, really. Although there's always sort of dark narratives and things like that. It was trying to find some characters or some little elements of it that were unexpected. Yeah. So we're doing things like the for Cataclysm, for the Worgen starting zone. It was gothic, but I was the things I was drawing, the ideas I was trying to get across were kind of like a dark gothic tragic romance to the werewolf saga, So move it away from, but I mean, it still ended up being werewolves in top hats, but inevitable. But still with a sadness to it.
In fact, on to answer that specific question, getting in contact with Mark was a core component of referencing previous Warhammer. and ensuring that the tone of previous Warhammer was brought back into the work as it currently stood. It would have been very easy to have been entirely swayed by the art for the last editions of Warhammer. And the art for the last editions of Warhammer were very painterly, with a realistic tone, often going for the swooping, epic, almost medieval religious war scenes. You could feel John Blanche's influence in much of how they were often depicted. And his tone had permeated through to the point that Warhammer had become almost that alone, and the previous types of Warhammer that had existed before he had had such a strong influence on its overall look, and before many of the artists had moved on, had gone. And much of the tone from this material that we were intending to release was different. It was written by people like Nigel Stillman, who came up with some of the craziest puns known to man. It was written by people like, well, Graham Davis. It was written by the old, let's say the old guard of the studio, a bunch of university students who were giggling away to themselves in a design studio, writing stupid things, referencing the books they just happened to be reading last night, whether that was Michael Moorcock or I don't know, Frank Herbert, whomever it might have been, as Dune was sitting, Dune, that'd be a cool thing to reference. And humour, and anti-Thatcherite humour in particular, was everywhere. Satire proliferated. So going back and going, what made each of these editions brilliant was a core component of trying to pitch a new edition. And the obvious expensive nature of some of those artists, thanks Mark for ruining my budget, was a core component also, because some people were worth definitely bring in. There was no way the second Mark said he'd do it, I wasn't having as much fucking Mark art as I could have in those books, because he brought a different version of Warhammer that Games Workshop themselves had semi-moved on from, but kept on referencing again and again, particularly in the post-8th edition world, where they started looking at much of Mark's original art and going, yeah, we've lost something. Let's go back to that and make a model that looks like that one. And it was super fascinating to see that process as Games Workshop started reverting back on itself in the same way that I'd been doing about 2-3 years earlier. And I'd had conversations with some of the people down there going, this is what we want our Warhammer to look like. We brought out the core book and the plans for it. And them going, yeah, I see why you're doing that. And it was really fascinating to see that they started doing similar things. Now, I'm not saying in any way that I influenced that, because that wasn't what we were doing. We just weren't trying to make a book that we thought rocked. But that was by bringing all the editions together. And you establish that right at the beginning. And even if you can't execute at the beginning, which we couldn't with the core book, I wasn't running the core book, so that wasn't my job. But as we came into this first set of books, we couldn't because of budget, we couldn't because of the reality of production or whatever. That didn't change the goal. Every goal was the same, and then as the budget allowed for things to happen, then that goal could be hopefully realized in a better way. So yeah, there you go.
So John Pick has asked, if you could write a sequel or new edition of any adventure or system, what could it be? And broaden it out to your own tastes. A sequel or a new edition of anything. I'll take in some comments while you think about it. I think a new edition is nearly always a remake, except with Traveller and Shadowrun. Bill missed second ed with Fripp, and welcome to humour. Didn't notice the lack in second until I got a second ed Nuln book, and it seemed so grim.
Oh yeah, that was Rob. Rob Schwalb writes grim stuff, so not a great surprise. I'll start then. If I was to do anything that was for anything, without worrying about costs, without worrying about who else holds licenses, and just going for stuff that I've always loved, I would almost certainly do something Eternal Champion based for Michael Moorcock. My greatest regret out of all the choices I've made when working for various other companies or licenses was turning down working on, of all things, just a map for the Young Kingdoms for Melnibone from Mongoose, because they offered me, I think it was something in the region of about 15% of my normal rate. And I was like, oof. And it was a dream project, just because I had complete freedom to do whatever I wanted with it. And I deliberated for a full week and a half before I eventually went, no, because they'll ask me to do the next one. I just, no, I've got other jobs that are paying tons more. And my kids were tiny at that point and money was always nice. And I was like, no, I'll spend too much time on it because I'll start it and I'm going to spend a month and a half on this easy. I'll use that full deadline time for that because I'll do it properly. I want to do this. Fuck that. So I turned it down and regretted it ever since. And I had a similar issue with the John Carter roleplay game when it came out. That was just before I got offered the job for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition. And they, in this case, Modiphius were releasing a John Carter roleplaying game. And I got approached to do the map for that, and I had freedom to map Mars any way I wanted. And I immediately sent them back, literally same day, a complete set of concepts and sketches for how it could work. They got so excited it was silly. They're like, what do you want to be charged for this? I gave them a ridiculously extortionate fee. I was so excited, and they said, fee is fine, away you go. Then I got offered the job. I hadn't signed the contracts, and I got back and said, I might not be able to do this because... oh no, I've just been offered a full-time job producing my dream game. And I kind of want to do that. That would be great, I think. Oh no. And they were like, don't worry, do you mind if we use those concepts and give them to someone else? So they gave them over to Francesca Beraldi, and she ended up doing my maps pretty much as I asked, because they used that as the commissioning document. So I kind of felt like I did it at a distance. And it was really nice to see what Francesca did with my original intention, to see it just built in a very different way, because she obviously painted it all by hand, because that's how Francesca does her maps, and it was lovely. And seeing that was just brilliant, while simultaneously I cried because the 12-year-old Andy was looking on going, what are you doing? To which I said, 12-year-old Andy, you're a dick. I'm going to run Warhammer. To which he went, all right, fair enough. Yep, okay. But I like John Carter, but fair enough. Yep, fair. Yeah, I'll shut up now. So, Michael Moorcock for me.
What do you think, Mark?
Oh God, probably some sort of classic fantasy. The Fafod and the Grey Mouse, maybe that might be great to do a role play. Have they done a role playing game of Frisieva? I don't know.
I'm not aware of it. I know that there's a license held by an American company, because Nathan Long, who's also been on our show, go check our previous streams. He now works over at In Exile for Microsoft et al. As their head story writer. He's written a bunch of extra stories in their universe because they hold the license. And for him, that was literally a dream product, because that was the stuff that he'd read as a kid. The stuff that he loved, and he got to write more of it. He could not have been happier with that. But I don't think there's a roleplay game. If there is, if anyone knows of one, do tell us. Go pop it over in our Discord channel. There's not a link for the Discord channel over in the video description. I'll make sure that that's added later. Yeah.
Excellent.
Good choice.
So, Shedition changed their question, but I think their first question with the mistake in it was better. This is the question that they said: when is the right time for an extension, a sequel, or a complete reboot, whatever. This is the actual question that they submitted first. When is the right time for an expansion? For an expansion, because you can't have more than one expansion for a sequel or for a reboot. So I actually thought Shedition was being funny, so I'm keeping Shedition's initial humor.
I love that.
Yeah. Actually, I'll just come, because someone did pre-submit. Very similar question. How do you decide it's time for a new edition? When the publisher needs more money, when X time has passed, when interest in previous edition is waning, when problems with the previous edition become hard to avoid and might get in the way of future supplements.
Yeah, all of the above. Ultimately it lies in the hands of whomever owns the IP. That's the first one. And whomever owns the IP will often look at one thing only, and that's the ka-ching ching number. Where is the money sitting at the moment? And will that ka-ching ching number go up best with expanding what's already out there, revising it entirely, or adding to it in some other way? And then comes the creative discussion with whomever it is they try to employ, or alternatively works in-house to work on this. And often you'll get a bit of butting of heads. Where the creatives will go, I think this is the best way of doing it. And the people who have the money go, yeah, nah. Yeah, now we want a new thing that's entirely fresh, or alternatively, no, we want to bridge off of the current thing and make a new thing. So controls often taken out of the hands of the creatives and held by people with cash. And that means that the answers to this are often not the best answers. The best answers might be to tell the best story. And the best story might be best expressed through an expansion rather than, say, for example, a reboot. The best story might land with a sequel rather than necessarily another sequel and another sequel and another sequel. Why are we doing this? Because the last one made money. And another sequel and another sequel. Why are we still doing this? Because we're still putting in less money than we're getting out of it. And we're happy with that. Screw the creative benefits that we could potentially bring to the system here. So most of the time, the right time is when it will make enough money. And it's not even often a lot of money, because sometimes a lot of money would be far more likely with something new. But they go, no, I'm quite happy with more of the same, even if it's shit, because it will make enough.
Yeah,
which is depressing sometimes.
I watched an interview with George R. R. Martin lately, and he was talking about he has 7 Westeros projects currently in development with who has the rights for it? Max, isn't it? HBO.
Yeah, HBO.
And I love the original Game of Thrones books. The TV series, the first 5 seasons were great. They're making more. They're making The Hedge-Knight, which I'm really excited because I love that book. So I'm kind of, this is great. But I also thought, God, there's so many fantastic contemporary fantasy novels and series of novels that could be made into amazing TV shows.
Mm-hmm.
And you go, why will you not cast your net a little further? The people with the money, because I guess it's less of a gamble to make another.
Yeah, fear of failure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just look at John Carter.
Yeah, well, they shouldn't have called it John Carter for starters.
Oh no, absolutely not. Like
what a mess.
Princess of Mars, or even John Carter of Mars. Warlord of Mars. Something that indicates
anything but John Carter.
Yeah,
like it was just so bad. I remember seeing it on buses and just being like, and I wasn't a big like John Carter fan. Andy was, and Andy had told me all about it over the years, and it was just like why? Well, it's just some guy on a bus called John. Like, it doesn't tell me anything about this movie. Oh, it was so bad.
Yeah, he's an accountant from Clapham, I mean, okay, it's a rom-com. What is it? I mean,
exactly. It could have been just anything.
Yeah, terribly marketed movie. Which was a shame, because the actual movie was pretty decent. I quite enjoyed it. I didn't expect to enjoy it as much as I did. Yeah.
Fine. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, shame. Anyway. So the fear of failure is also a significant part of this. I mean, it's one of the reasons why we're getting all of the Game of Throneses, more Game of Throneses, because these productions, particularly when it comes to movies, are so expensive. So you don't want to plow your money into something that won't necessarily be a success. It's one of the reasons why we don't have, for example, a Michael Moorcock production yet. Just before COVID, there was going to be Dorian Hawkmoon, Grand Britannia, complete set made by both HBO and BBC. That I believe the pair of them had bought the license. They were in planning. COVID hit and it all stopped. Just before that, the Elric got bought, was in its pre-production, and then the Golden Compass land didn't make enough money, and they said, oh well, nope, stop, all fantasy off the board, and that stopped being a thing. New Line Cinema was then bought out and brought into, I can't remember which who took in New Line Cinema, and that stopped that project. So you tend to find that there's lots of these potential other projects going into pre-production, but so few of them eventually land. And for me, who's looking for certain projects to go, it's a bit sad. But when we're over on the gaming side, you tend to find that the amount of money that's ploughed into these things is so much smaller. The amount of time and investment that's required is, again, so much smaller that most of these projects will land or be produced in some fashion or another. But the chance of sequels are not necessarily very high, or indeed expansions for many of them, unless they do make quite a bit of money for the people involved, particularly if it's a company that's got investors, because you have to split between the investors and the obvious next steps for the games that may be involved.
John Pick asks, new editions are always a divisive topic. How important is it to stay true to the previous editions while also bringing in fresh ideas? Or is it a balancing act and compromise to please as many people as possible? And that also relates to that comment in the chat from Martin about like there's been cases where fans have demanded a new edition.
Yeah.
Oh, Golden Chaos also says, right, D&D 6th edition, Andy.
Yeah, that'd be fun. Yeah, that'd be a joy. So there's a lot there, and I think the word compromise there comes almost across like it's a negative. Compromise is often perceived as a negative because you feel like you're having to shave things off to make it acceptable for one reason or another. But compromise could be repitched there as defining lines for that project, for making a very clear set of a clear pitch for what that project will be. And that will sometimes look like and could be defined as a compromise for someone who has a different idea for what that pitch should be. But whenever you're making a new edition of a thing, then you are always taking into account the previous editions. If you're not, you're doing it wrong. You just are, which means that you are automatically working within a box that is, to a degree, predefined. If you're making a new edition of D&D, for example, you have to take into account all of the previous editions, not just the previous one before it. Take the best of each, do what you can with each, and then have your own creative vision for what this version's going to do. And
yeah.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah,
you would think with all the great minds at Games Workshop, they would have nailed 40k after 10 editions.
Yeah, you'd think.
But every 3 years they'll make a new one. Partly because you have to, keep in mind what has gone before, but also because it's a massive boost in sales.
In sales.
A whole bunch of miniatures. Everybody loves the new miniatures, and so that cycle is almost reinvigorates interest. It's sort of you have to follow that cycle because otherwise you just see your sales numbers slowly sliding away. Is it always the wheel? Are you always pushing that? Are you always Conan pushing that strange pole in the middle of the
just forever?
Is that your fate?
Yeah, I mean, for a project like that, kind of, yeah, until you move on to something new. I mean,
till they turn you into a pit fighter.
Pardon? Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Where is this analogy? Oh, I got it eventually.
Till you get to crash your enemies.
Yeah, totally.
Mornington Crescent points out Baldur's Gate 3 was a sequel, but was such a success. And there was a question. Sorry, Mark.
There was a comment about video games. Why are they are generally regarded as being better than what went before, and it's certainly the technology that
so Lazy Cat had asked, do you think sequels to video games are always better because the technology is always improving, or are there originals which completely stand the test of time? I mean, if there were, then they wouldn't remaster them, right?
Wrong. Of course they would. Well, no. So first, originals are going to be remastered because it's an injection of money and it updates graphics, and all of the nostalgia glasses will actually match what's currently sitting in front of them. When you go back to the originals of great games,
stand the test of time.
No. If you go back to the originals of great games, they still stand the test of time. Baldur's Gate 1 is still thoroughly playable, but it is absolutely not Baldur's Gate 3. And that would not surprise me if in the course of the next 10 years, because it's been taken out of the hands, obviously, well, Larian moved themselves out of this. It would not surprise me if they went back and they did a rejig of it because it's there. And it will make a lot of money. And they've done this with game after game, particularly with Sony games for the PlayStation. They've gone through an awful lot of rejigs for new versions. Just take one of the more famous recent ones, The Last of Us, which got updated from PS3 to PS4 to PS5. Each one of those was a complete rejig of the original game, which still absolutely stands the test. If you go play the original version, it's brilliant, and it's still completely brilliant and in no way needs the extras. But when you play the new one, you go, all right, yeah, fair enough, I see what you're saying. Yeah, that's really pretty. I mean, it's really pretty, but it's identical. It's not a different game. So I would gently say that just because the original is brilliant, then no way stops a remake. But I'd also say that moving technology does significantly impact the improvements. Plus, it's not just that, it's the moving fan base expectations, because not all games manage it. And I'll give two series from the same studio, Mass Effect and Dragon Age. Mass Effect was pitched as effectively their Star Wars game. Your good side, light side. Oh no, we've got Paragon, we've got Renegade. And it was there no longer having the license because they'd made the Star Wars game previously and running with their own IP and doing their own thing. And the first one was pitched as an action RPG. So they were taking in all the benefits of action, hoping that they could bridge their roleplay crowd into the action crowd, which made more money. And the first game was an RPG and had a whole bunch of issues, so they cleaned them out and made the second game thematically as strong, but in terms of the RPG elements dialed down significantly, action dialed up, but the core plot story was sound. Into the third one, let's not discuss the end, where they refined it each time. The mechanics got better with each one, it clearly got prettier each one, but that didn't happen with Dragon Age. The first game was legitimately great, but was bad on console, and was Baldur's Gate 3 in a different world. They'd made their own version of Baldur's Gate this time. Instead, they made Ferelden, and they made Thedas, and they made their own version of a fantasy world. So they tried to make it more like Mass Effect, which was a bigger seller. So they added action elements. Baldur's Gate 2 came along, was a Rust production, now by EA, screwed it up entirely. Baldur's Gate 3 came along, Inquisition, giant goals, shrunk it back down again, looked so much prettier, and the game was arguably better, but still, there are loads of people who still say that the first game is the best. So it stands as an example of where some series don't necessarily get better with each edition, but in computer games in general, yeah, they kind of generally do, because fan feedback comes in, and they go, well, we'll take that, the best bits, the peaks of fan feedback, incorporate that in our new one with refined systems, take everything we learned before, make it a little bit better, a bit smoother, hone off all the edges that were never needed in the first place and are nothing more than something we were going to do but never did, but still sort of in the game. We'll get those, and then here comes the second game, and it's just a cleaner example of what came before. So generally, yeah, but specifically, not necessarily.
There you go.
That is 8 o'clock, so that's the end of our interview. Yeah.
Oh, blink and flip.
Yeah. So thank you for joining me, Andy and Mark. Thank you to everyone in the chat, as always. We will see you again next week for another Inside the Rookery, same time, same place. Thank you, before we go, to all our patrons who make the stream possible. And please do like, share, subscribe, hit the bell, do all the things you need to do to stop me from uttering the words I uttered on Lawhammer last night. See you on the flip side. Until the next time.
Wow.
99.
99.
Bye-bye.